By early 1945, Europe was approaching the end of a conflict that had consumed millions of lives and reshaped the continent. Germany was crumbling under the combined pressure of multiple fronts. From the west, Allied forces had crossed into German territory, advancing toward the heart of the Reich. From the east, the Soviet Red Army was pushing relentlessly, capturing city after city, leaving devastation in its wake. The Third Reich, once a formidable force, now teetered on the brink of collapse. Yet even in its final months, Germany retained pockets of strength, and Hitler's government remained defiant. Allied planners faced a difficult question. How could they deliver a decisive blow that would end the war swiftly, limit further casualties among their own troops, and demonstrate power to both enemy and ally? The answer they developed would become known as Operation Thunderclap. Operation Thunderclap was conceived not merely as a military strike, but as a calculated demonstration of overwhelming power. It was intended to target key logistical hubs in eastern Germany, slowing troop movements and supply lines, while also delivering a psychological shock to the German population. The plan was controversial from the start, raising questions of morality, necessity, and proportionality. At the center of the campaign was Air Chief Marshal Sir Arthur Harris, commander of the Royal Air Force Bomber Command. Harris believed that the destruction of cities was not only a military strategy, but a method to break the will of the German people. He argued that continued aerial bombardment, especially against urban centers, would accelerate the end of the war and save lives in the long run by avoiding prolonged ground battles.
Critics condemned this approach as indiscriminate terror bombing, accusing Harris of targeting civilians rather than combatants. Harris defended it as a harsh but unavoidable truth of total war. Before we begin, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Here, we bring history's most powerful and often forgotten moments back to life. Stories of courage, tragedy, and decisions that changed humanity forever. Your support helps us keep these memories alive. Because this story is not one of victory. It is one of fire, of strategy shaped by desperation, of decisions that blurred the line between military necessity and moral reckoning. A story of how one mission, planned in the final months of World War II, transformed the very meaning of warfare. By February 1945, Harris's philosophy aligned with the strategic priorities of the Allied command. The Luftwaffe, Germany's air force, had been nearly neutralized, leaving cities exposed. Refineries, factories, and railways had already been attacked, but the German war effort continued to rely on remaining logistical hubs and transportation networks. Striking these hubs would not only disrupt military operations, but also send a clear signal of Allied dominance in the skies. Political considerations also played a role. As the Soviet Red Army advanced rapidly from the east, tensions grew between the Western Allies and the USSR over influence in post-war Europe. A demonstration of air power deep in German territory could serve as a subtle message of strength to the Soviets, asserting the presence and capability of the Western Allies. In this complex mix of strategy, politics, and military necessity, the decision was made to focus on a city that had largely escaped the destruction of the war: Dresden.
Dresden was unlike many other German cities. Renowned for its Baroque architecture, classical art collections, and cultural heritage, it had earned the nickname Florence of the Elbe. Unlike Berlin or Hamburg, it was not heavily fortified and had limited industrial output. Yet it was strategically positioned as a transportation hub, connecting eastern Germany with the western fronts, and had railway lines critical for troop movements. By February 1945, Dresden had changed dramatically. It had become a refuge for those fleeing the Soviet advance from the east.
hundreds of thousands of civilians, including women, children, and the elderly, poured into the city. Temporary shelters, schools, and churches were filled beyond capacity, while train stations overflowed with refugees seeking safety. What had once been a city of roughly 600,000 people now housed more than 1 million residents and displaced persons. On paper, Dresden's railways and infrastructure made it a valid target. In practice, its vulnerability lay in its civilian population and the lack of defensive measures. There were no anti-aircraft towers, limited fighter support, and no expectation of a major strike. Its historical and cultural significance made it a symbol of the fragility of human civilization during wartime. Allied planners argued that a decisive strike on Dresden would serve multiple objectives. It would disrupt supply lines, support the Soviet advance, and demonstrate the destructive power of modern air forces. But the plan was also a reflection of desperation, a final push to end the war before the Western and Eastern fronts met in Berlin, and to assert control over the post-war narrative. Preparations for the bombing began in early February. Airfields in southern England became staging grounds for hundreds of bombers. Crews were briefed, maps studied, and flares assigned to mark targets. To the airmen, Dresden was a mission like any other, a name on a map, a waypoint in a long series of raids. Few could imagine the scale of destruction that would unfold over the next 48 hours.
The city, meanwhile, remained unaware of the impending disaster. Citizens continued their daily routines, tending to refugees, maintaining businesses where possible, and clinging to a fragile sense of normalcy. The historic architecture, art galleries, and churches continued to stand as symbols of endurance, even as the war raged elsewhere in Germany. By mid-February, Dresden was poised on the edge of a catastrophe that would become one of the most controversial episodes of World War II. Its combination of strategic significance, cultural prominence, and civilian density created a situation in which military objectives and human cost collided in devastating ways. The stage was set. Allies in the air, civilians below, and a city unprepared for the firestorm that would soon engulf it. Operation Thunderclap was about to begin. At 10:03 p.m. on February 13, 1945, Dresden's air raid sirens began to wail across the city. Many residents ignored them, accustomed to false alarms, or believing their city too beautiful, too historic to be targeted. But the sound that followed was unmistakable. A low, rolling hum, growing steadily louder as hundreds of bombers approached from the northwest. Royal Air Force Lancasters and Mosquitoes cut through the cold February sky, carrying both high explosive and incendiary bombs. Flares were dropped from the lead planes, marking streets and landmarks below, guiding the waves of bombers toward their targets. At 10:13, the first bomb struck. Explosions shattered streets and buildings, sending debris flying in all directions. Water mains ruptured and fires ignited instantly. Emergency services, unprepared for the scale and intensity of the attack, struggled to respond. The city's carefully preserved streets and buildings were transformed into chaos within minutes.
Soon after, incendiary bombs followed. Thousands of small cylinders scattered across rooftops, igniting fires that merged into a single, uncontrollable blaze. The fires spread rapidly, consuming wooden structures and overwhelming stone buildings. Air was drawn into the inferno, feeding a firestorm that grew hotter and more violent with every passing minute. Civilians ran through the streets, seeking refuge in basements, cellars, and open squares. Many were caught by sudden gusts of flame-driven wind. Others suffocated as smoke and heat consumed the air. Churches, schools, theaters, and public halls collapsed under the intensity of the fire. By midnight, the firestorm had engulfed the city center. Dresden's skyline, once celebrated for its domes, spires, and palaces, was now silhouetted against the raging inferno. Smoke rose miles into the sky, a glowing testament to the devastation below. For those who survived the initial bombing, the night was a desperate struggle. Families searched for one another, often finding only rubble and ash where homes had once stood. The wounded were tended in improvised shelters, while countless others were left to face the elements, injuries, and trauma alone. The RAF's first wave returned to base, and American bombers prepared for their follow-up attack. By dawn, the city would face a second strike, completing a campaign that had begun as a strategic operation, but had escalated into one of the deadliest urban bombardments of the war. Dresden's civilian population had nowhere to flee and few defenses to mount. What had been a city of culture, history, and refuge became a furnace of destruction, a human catastrophe on a scale few had imagined possible.
The consequences were immediate and staggering. Tens of thousands perished, injured or displaced. Infrastructure was obliterated. Cultural landmarks that had stood for centuries were reduced to rubble. Operation Thunderclap had achieved its military objectives on paper. Transportation hubs were destroyed, bridges collapsed, and German troop movements were slowed. But the human cost was almost incalculable. Civilians had become the center of destruction, and the moral implications of targeting a city with minimal military significance sparked controversy that would persist for decades. By the early hours of February 14th, the firestorm began to subside, leaving a city forever altered. The full scale of destruction would only become evident as survivors emerged, wandering through streets unrecognizable and searching for loved ones among the ruins. By the morning of February 14th, Dresden lay in ruins. Smoke still rose from smoldering buildings, and the acrid smell of burning debris filled the air. Entire neighborhoods had vanished. Streets that had once teemed with life were now unrecognizable, littered with rubble and ash. Survivors emerged cautiously from basements, shelters, and cellars, their eyes adjusting to a city transformed into a landscape of destruction. Families searched desperately for one another, often finding only fragments of homes or the bodies of loved ones. Those who had managed to survive the firestorm faced injuries, burns, and trauma, compounded by a lack of food, water, and medical care.
The scale of devastation was staggering. Dresden was not a heavily fortified industrial city, yet it had been reduced to near total destruction. The Frauenchurch, the Zwinger Palace, and the Semper Opera House, icons of the city's culture and history, lay in ruins. Railways, bridges, and factories had been destroyed, slowing German troop movements but leaving civilian life shattered. Emergency services struggled to respond. Firefighters were overwhelmed by the sheer intensity of the firestorm, and hospitals were quickly overwhelmed with casualties. Makeshift aid stations were set up in surviving buildings, churches, and cellars, but the scale of human suffering far exceeded available resources. Eyewitness accounts describe scenes of unimaginable horror. Streets were filled with burned rubble and the remains of buildings. People wandered in shock, seeking family members, food, and water. The psychological trauma of seeing entire communities obliterated in hours left deep scars on those who survived. The humanitarian crisis extended beyond the immediate city center. Refugees who had fled eastward from Soviet advances were trapped in the destruction, their hopes of safety replaced by despair. The winter cold added to the suffering as makeshift shelters offered little protection from the elements.
Despite the chaos, acts of courage and humanity emerged. Neighbors rescued neighbors, strangers carried the wounded to safety, and citizens shared scarce resources. Doctors, nurses, and volunteers worked tirelessly to treat burns, smoke inhalation, and trauma, often with minimal supplies. The bombing of Dresden raised profound moral and ethical questions. Was it a necessary military strike or an indiscriminate attack on civilians? Historians continue to debate the justification, but the human cost is undeniable. Tens of thousands had died, and countless more were left injured, homeless, and traumatized.
Operation Thunderclap demonstrated the devastating power of modern aerial warfare. It showed that entire urban centers could be destroyed in hours, and that civilian populations were vulnerable in ways previously unimaginable. It also sparked lasting debates about the ethics of targeting civilians and the responsibilities of military planners. For Dresden, the destruction marked a turning point in its history. The city would rebuild, but the scars of the firestorm remained, visible in the streets, remembered in the stories of survivors, and memorialized in monuments and museums. The events of February 13th and 14th, 1945, left a legacy that extended far beyond the war itself. They became a symbol of the destructive power of total war, a cautionary tale about the human cost of military strategy, and a reminder of the resilience of those who endure unimaginable tragedy. In the weeks and months following the bombing, Dresden faced an almost unimaginable challenge: survival amid ruin. The city's infrastructure had been shattered, roads blocked by debris, bridges collapsed, and utilities like water, gas, and electricity non-existent. Homes, schools, hospitals, and businesses were destroyed, leaving survivors to confront a landscape that was both unfamiliar and hostile. Food and clean water were scarce. Supply lines disrupted by the bombing and ongoing military operations meant that what little aid arrived was delayed or insufficient. People scavenged through rubble for whatever could be salvaged: cooked meals, blankets, clothing, or building materials. Every act of survival was an exercise in resilience, resourcefulness, and sheer determination.
Psychological trauma was widespread. Survivors carried the memory of the firestorm, the heat, smoke, and chaos as a permanent scar. Many lost entire families, their homes, and the city they had known all their lives. Children grew up in the shadow of destroyed streets, learning to navigate a city where the familiar landmarks were gone, replaced by ruins. Yet amid despair, communities came together. Neighbors supported one another, sharing what food and shelter they had. Makeshift hospitals and care centers were set up in the few remaining structures, staffed by doctors, nurses, and volunteers who worked under extreme conditions. Even in the face of devastation, human compassion persisted, creating networks of aid and solidarity. The cultural losses were staggering. Centuries of art, architecture, and history were obliterated. The Frauenkirche, a masterpiece of Baroque architecture, lay in ruins. Museums, palaces, and theaters that had been symbols of human achievement were reduced to ashes. Rebuilding the city's cultural heritage would take decades, and some losses could never be replaced. The long-term consequences extended beyond physical destruction. Dresden citizens faced the challenge of reconstructing their lives in a city stripped of its infrastructure, history, and familiar spaces. Psychological recovery was slow, with many grappling with grief, trauma, and the lingering fear of future attacks.
Operation Thunderclap also left an enduring impact on military strategy and international law. It highlighted the destructive potential of strategic bombing and sparked debates about the morality of targeting civilian populations. Dresden became a case study in the ethics of warfare, influencing military planners, historians, and policymakers for decades to come.
Despite the devastation, Dresden's story is also one of resilience. The city slowly rebuilt its homes, schools, and cultural landmarks. Communities worked tirelessly to restore what was lost, honoring the memory of those who perished while reclaiming a sense of normalcy. Dresden's reconstruction became a symbol of human determination, demonstrating that even in the wake of immense tragedy, life could continue and flourish. The events of February 1945 serve as both a warning and a lesson. They remind the world of the devastating consequences of war on civilians, the ethical responsibilities of military power, and the enduring importance of preserving human life and culture. Dresden stands as a testament to suffering, endurance, and the ability of humanity to rebuild from the ashes of catastrophe. Operation Thunderclap left an indelible mark on history, reshaping both the understanding of warfare and the moral framework through which it is judged. From a military perspective, Dresden demonstrated the unprecedented destructive power of modern aerial bombardment. It showed that cities could be effectively neutralized, not just through targeted attacks on military infrastructure, but through the combination of high explosives and incendiaries designed to create firestorms. This capability fundamentally changed how military planners approached strategic objectives, emphasizing air superiority and total destruction as a means to achieve rapid outcomes. However, the operation also raised profound ethical questions. Dresden had limited military significance compared to its cultural and civilian value, and yet tens of thousands of non-combatants perished. The debate continues. Was the bombing a necessary action to hasten the end of the war, or an indiscriminate act of terror against civilians? Historians, ethicists, and military scholars remain divided, using Dresden as a central case study in discussions of wartime morality.
The legacy of the bombing extended into post-war international law and policy. The destruction of Dresden, along with other urban bombings, contributed to evolving conventions regarding the protection of civilians in armed conflict. The firestorm highlighted the need to distinguish between legitimate military targets and civilian populations, shaping debates that eventually influenced treaties, war crime tribunals, and the development of humanitarian law. Dresden's experience also had a psychological and cultural impact. For survivors, it was not merely an event in history, but a lived catastrophe that shaped identity, memory, and storytelling. Memorials, museums, and annual commemorations ensure that the suffering is remembered and that future generations learn the consequences of total war. The city's reconstruction, including the painstaking restoration of landmarks like the Frauenkirche, became both a physical and symbolic act of resilience, bridging past and present. Operation Thunderclap also influenced military thinking in subsequent conflicts. The demonstration that strategic bombing could paralyze a city and break morale informed planning during later wars, including Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. It forced commanders and governments to confront the reality that civilian populations were increasingly vulnerable in modern conflict, prompting discussions about proportionality, ethics, and the rules of engagement. Ultimately, Dresden stands as a testament to both the destructive power of technology and the resistance of human communities. The city reminds us that war is not fought only on battlefields, but in the streets, homes, and lives of ordinary people. It is a lesson in the consequences of strategic decisions and the moral responsibilities that accompany power. In remembering Dresden, we do more than recount numbers and buildings destroyed. We honor the lives lost
acknowledge the trauma endured, and confront the ethical dilemmas that continue to shape military and political decision-making. Operation Thunderclap is a story of devastation and courage, destruction and reconstruction, morality and strategy, a story that forever changed the way the world perceives warfare.
As we reflect on the story of Dresden and Operation Thunderclap, its lessons extend far beyond the immediate devastation of February 1945. The city's experience reminds us that war is never contained to battlefields alone. Decisions made by commanders, politicians, and strategists ripple outward, affecting civilians, culture, and generations yet to come. The human cost of strategic choices is immense, often irreparable, and must remain at the forefront of any consideration of military action. Dresden also illustrates the resilience of the human spirit. Despite the firestorm, the destruction, and the unimaginable loss, the city and its people endured. Communities rebuilt homes, restored landmarks, and nurtured cultural institutions. Memorials were erected to honor the dead, ensuring that history would not forget their suffering. Operation Thunderclap challenged assumptions about warfare. It demonstrated that technological superiority could obliterate cities within hours, and that civilians were vulnerable in ways that had never been seen before. It forced nations to confront the moral and ethical implications of strategic bombing, shaping debates that continue in military and humanitarian discussions today. For historians, Dresden serves as both a case study and a cautionary tale. For ordinary citizens, it is a story of survival, endurance, and recovery against impossible odds. Dresden stands today not only as a testament to suffering, but as a symbol of endurance, learning, and the capacity to rebuild.
Operation Thunderclap changed the way the world viewed warfare forever. It forced nations and individuals alike to confront the devastating consequences of modern conflict. And it reminds us, even in the darkest hours, resilience, remembrance, and the lessons of history can guide humanity toward a future where such destruction is not repeated. Thank you for joining us in revisiting this chapter of history. By remembering Dresden, we honor those who endured its horrors, acknowledge the human cost of war, and reaffirm the importance of learning from the past. If you found this story compelling, make sure to subscribe and stay with us as we continue to uncover the pivotal moments that shaped our world.
Close your eyes. Breathe slowly. Let the sound of the wind fill the room around you. Imagine a horizon so wide it seems to swallow the world. A place where the earth meets the sky in a perfect whisper, and the grass moves like the waves of an endless green ocean. This is the Mongolian steppe, where time itself feels different, slower, quieter, ancient. Tonight, we are not in the modern world. There are no cities here, no clocks, no borders. Only the hum of the wind, the beat of distant hooves, and the quiet breath of eternity. It is here, in this vast sea of silence, that our story begins. The story of a man born in the cold, raised in hunger, and carried by the wind. A man who would one day rule from the saddle, and whose empire would stretch farther than any before him. His name was Genghis Khan. But before he became a conqueror, he was just a sleepless boy, staring at the same stars you see now.
Welcome to Urgent Talk, where history is told in whispers, softly enough to help you rest, but vividly enough to keep your dreams wandering through the past. If you enjoy drifting through quiet tales of kings, queens, and empires, make sure to subscribe so you never miss another story that time forgot. And before you drift too far into sleep, leave a calm comment below. Tell us the time and place where you're listening from, your city, your hour, your corner of the night. It's always peaceful to see how far these stories travel. Now, let's begin. Take one deep breath. Feel the air fill your chest. Then let it go, softly, slowly, like the sigh of the steppe itself. Tonight you'll travel not just through history, but through the rhythm of the wind, through the life of a man who rarely closed his eyes, and when he did, dreamed of entire worlds bending beneath his will. And by morning, by first light, you'll see how one person's dreams can change the world forever.
The mother, Holun, held the infant close to her chest. Her skin was raw from the winter wind, her breath shallow but steady. She looked at the child, tiny and fragile, and whispered a name that would one day make the world tremble. Temujin. Outside, the horses stirred, sensing something in the air. A storm? A spirit? Perhaps both. The wind moved restlessly through the camp, tugging at the tent flaps, whistling through the grass. It was as if the land itself was awake, listening. The land of endless motion. The Mongol steppe has no walls, no borders, no stillness. It is a place that breathes, a place where men are shaped by distance, by hunger, by cold. Here you do not sleep deeply, because the wind never stops. It hums through the night, rustling the tents, whispering ancient songs through the grass. The people of this land learned to live with it, to ride with it, to listen to it. And among them was a boy who would one day learn to command it. A boy beneath the stars. As Temujin grew, he learned early that the world was not kind. His father, Yasuge, was a tribal leader, a proud man with a strong bow and stronger enemies. When Temujin was 9, his father was poisoned by a rival tribe. That night, Holun sat by the fire, her face lit by the last embers, and told her children, "From now on, we are alone." The clan turned their backs on them. The family was cast out, left to survive with no protection, no food, no allies. In the steppe, abandonment was a death sentence. But Holun and her children lived. They hunted small animals, gathered wild onions, and drank from frozen streams. Temujin watched his mother's hands, raw, strong, unyielding, and from her he learned what endurance truly meant. The sleepless child. Night after night, Temujin would lie awake inside the tent, listening to the wind move over the plains. Sometimes he could hear wolves calling in the distance. Sometimes he heard nothing but silence. He began to imagine the wind as a living thing, a spirit that never rested. It moved through mountains, over rivers, through men's dreams. He whispered to it. He asked it questions no one could answer. And though the wind never spoke, it always seemed to listen. Even as a child, he understood something that most never would, that rest is not peace, that stillness can be a kind of death, and that the wind, the restless wind, was the only thing that truly lived forever. Years passed. Temujin's hands grew calloused. His eyes hardened. He learned to ride, to hunt, to fight. But even then he could not sleep. His mind wandered to the stars above, to the horizon that stretched beyond all knowing. He dreamed not of rest, but of movement, of tribes united, of an endless world made whole under one sky. He didn't yet know how, he didn't yet know when, but he knew, somewhere deep in his sleepless heart, that he was meant to move with the wind, not against it. The first fire. One night, when the cold was unbearable, Holin lit a small fire in the tent. The flames danced low, flickering gold against her tired face. Temujin stared at the fire until his eyes blurred. He realized something. Fire was like people. It needed air to live, and too much of it made it wild. Too little, and it died. It burned not because it wanted to, but because it had to. Just like the wind, just like him. He whispered quietly to the flames, "I will burn like you." The promise. Temujin grew restless. Every night he found it harder to lie still. He felt as if something inside him was waiting. A storm, a hunger, a calling. And so he made a silent promise to the sky. I will rise. I will unite what is broken. I will be the wind that never sleeps. The fire crackled softly in reply. The stars blinked above, ancient and indifferent. And somewhere in the dark, a wolf howled, long, lonely, and eternal. The night continued. The wind did not stop, and the boy who never slept grew into the man who would conquer the world.
The night in the Mongolian steppe was colder than memory, the kind of cold that crept under the skin, whispering through bone and blood. The stars burned sharp and white above the world, scattered like shards of broken ice. Beneath them, a child slept, or tried to, beneath a rough blanket of wool, his tiny body curled against the wind. That child's name was Temujin. No one yet knew that this small, trembling boy would one day become Genghis Khan, the ruler of all who rode beneath the sky. But for now, he was just a boy, hungry, alone, and sleepless. His father, Yesuge, was a proud Mongol chieftain who ruled a small tribe with fierce pride and old traditions. His mother, Hoelun, was a woman of strength, taken by Yesuge from another clan, yet unbroken in spirit. Their world was one of horses and hunger, of loyalty and betrayal, of nights filled with the howl of wolves and mornings that began before the sun rose. Temujin was born clutching a small clot of blood in his fist, a sign, the shamans said, that he would be a man of power. But power never comes easily. When Temujin was just 9, his father arranged for him to marry a girl from another tribe, Bursa, whose name would one day be remembered beside his own in every legend of the Mongols.
But on his journey back from delivering his son to Berta's family, Yasuge stopped at a feast hosted by the Tatars, a rival tribe. They offered him fermented mare's milk, and he accepted it. What he didn't know was that it was poisoned. Yasuge rode home in pain, growing weaker with every mile. By the time he reached his family, he could barely speak. He died that night, under the same wide sky that had witnessed his son's birth.
Temujin was only 9 years old, and in the cruel law of the steppes, a chieftain's death meant his family's downfall. His tribe, once loyal to Yasugai, abandoned the widow and her children, leaving them to starve among the endless grasslands. Those were the years of sleepless survival. Hoelin gathered wild roots and small rodents, while the children hunted birds and dug for scraps in the frozen earth. Temujin learned early that hunger has a sound, a whisper that follows you through every dream. At night he lay awake listening to the wolves, his stomach growling, his mind restless. But within him grew a fire, small, steady, and unyielding. One evening, as the steppe winds howled across their broken camp, Temujin sat by the embers of a dying fire and whispered to his mother, "Someday I will gather them all again. No tribe will abandon their own. I'll make one nation, one people." His mother looked at him, her face lit by the last flicker of flame, and saw something new in his eyes, not the fear of a child, but the resolve of a future ruler. Years passed. Temujin grew into a young man with eyes like steel, and a voice that carried command even when spoken softly. But fate was not done testing him. One night, while he was still only a teenager, a rival tribe, the Taichiod, captured him. They bound his neck with a heavy wooden collar, a crude shackle called a kang, meant to break both the body and the will. He was paraded through the camp like an animal, mocked, beaten, and starved. But Temujin watched, waited, and listened. And one night, under a sky darker than sorrow, he made his move. When his guard fell asleep, Temujin broke free, smashing the wooden collar against a rock. He ran barefoot through the icy grasslands, every breath a knife, every heartbeat a prayer. He hid in the reeds by the river, his body trembling, his mind sharper than ever. By dawn he was gone, a ghost, a shadow, a promise. That escape would become legend. But more importantly, it became the moment Temujin learned the truth of the steppes. No one is coming to save you. You must ride alone until others choose to follow. And they did follow, slowly, one by one. Old allies of his father, men who remembered his courage as a child, friends who saw in him not just survival, but something greater, destiny. Before we continue deeper into the story of his rise, don't forget to subscribe to Urgent Talk for more calm, cinematic bedtime journeys through history. And as always, let us know in the comments, what time are you listening and from where in the world? It's always magical to see how stories from ancient winds reached the hearts of people across oceans and time zones. Now, close your eyes once more. The fire still burns, the stars still watch, and Temujin, soon to be Genghis Khan, rides again.
The dawn came slowly that morning, pale and uncertain, like a memory fading through mist. Temujin stood alone at the edge of the river, his breath forming clouds in the air, his hands trembling from exhaustion and cold. He had escaped death, but freedom on the steppe was a strange kind of prison. The world stretched endlessly around him. Beautiful, yes, but merciless. The kind of beauty that doesn't care if you live or die beneath it. For days he wandered. He hunted small animals with stones, drank from rivers, and followed the wind north. The sound of horses in the distance haunted him, not as danger, but as destiny. Because Temujin knew, the horse was the heartbeat of the Mongol. It was freedom, strength, and the rhythm of their entire world.
Every Mongol was born in the saddle, raised in the saddle, and if they were lucky, they died there too. Temujin would be no different. In time, he found his way back to his mother and siblings. Their camp was humble, a scattering of worn tents and old dreams, but the fire in Temujin's eyes burned brighter than ever. He was no longer a frightened boy. He was a man forged by hunger and pain, a man who understood what others did not, that unity was power and loyalty was worth more than blood. He began to gather followers, not through wealth or birthright, but through respect. He treated his men as brothers, listened to their worries, shared their food, and rewarded courage no matter who it came from. In the world of the steppes, that was revolutionary. He made alliances with old friends and rival clans alike. Most importantly, with a powerful leader named Togrul, the Khan of the Kirat tribe. Togrul had once been a friend of Temujin's father, and when Temujin came to him asking for protection, the old Khan agreed. Temujin was still young, but his eyes were already those of a leader who slept little and dreamed much. He returned to reclaim Bertay, his betrothed. Their reunion was quiet, almost tender. Under the open sky, with the steppe wind weaving through her hair, Bertay smiled. She had waited for him, through storms, through fear, through uncertainty. Together they began to build something new. But peace on the steppe is fragile, and dreams are easily broken. One night, a rival tribe, the Merkits, descended upon Temujin's camp. They burned his tents, stole his horses, and took Bertay away. Temujin was devastated. He rode for days, sleepless and relentless, across frozen rivers and endless plains. Every hoofbeat was a heartbeat of rage. He sought help from Togrul and another rising leader, Jamuka, a man who was once Temujin's blood brother. Together their forces attacked the Merkit camp under the cover of dawn. The battle was swift and brutal. Smoke rose across the valley as horses screamed and arrows hissed through the air. And when it was done, when the dust had settled, Temujin found Bertay again.
She ran to him, weeping. He held her close, whispering words only the wind could hear. That night, for the first time in many years, he slept. But only for a few hours, because Temujin was not built for rest. He was built for motion. In the years that followed, he began to shape the tribes of Mongolia into something new, something the steppe had never seen before. Temujin had learned from hunger, betrayal, and pain, and he turned those lessons into rules. He built a code of loyalty called the Yasa, a law that bound every warrior to him not by blood, but by honor. He abolished the idea of noble birth. He promoted warriors based on skill, not family. He demanded discipline. No stealing, no betrayal, no needless cruelty. In a land where chaos had reigned for centuries, Temujin brought order. And slowly, the people began to whisper his name not in fear, but in respect. Temujin, the man who sleeps little, rides far, and never forgets. But not all hearts welcomed unity. Jamuka, his old blood brother, grew jealous of Temujin's growing power. Once they had shared dreams. Now they shared a rivalry that would shape the fate of empires. Jamuka called himself the Gur Khan, meaning universal ruler, and challenged Temujin's claim to leadership. The steppe divided once again. Temujin's men rode by night, their horses silent, their eyes sharp. They struck swiftly, vanishing before the enemy could react. He taught them to fight like the wind, invisible, untouchable, unstoppable. Jamuka's army was larger, but Temujin's was smarter. And soon the plains were filled with whispers of victory. Temujin's banners rising over conquered camps, his warriors singing beneath the stars. When Jamuka was finally defeated, Temujin spared no cruelty, but he also showed mercy, not the kind that comes from weakness, but the kind that commands loyalty. He would say to his men, "Loyalty is earned, not forced. A man who fears you will flee when you falter. A man who respects you will die by your side." And they did, many times. Temujin now stood at the edge of something vast, something he could feel in his bones but could not yet see. The steppe was his home, but beyond the mountains lay worlds waiting
To be conquered, kingdoms of silk, walls of stone, empires that had never known the sound of thunder from 1,000 hooves. But for now, he looked to the stars, the same stars that had watched him as a boy, the same stars that burned above every battlefield, every sleepless night. He whispered softly to the darkness, "Not yet, but soon." And the wind carried his words away, across the plains, over rivers, into the dreams of men who would one day follow him to the ends of the earth. The year was 1206. The wind of the steppe carried the scent of smoke, iron, and horse sweat. Across the vast plains of Mongolia, the tribes had finally come together, not as enemies, but as one people. After decades of betrayal, bloodshed, and shifting loyalties, a single man had done the impossible. He had united the Mongols. His name was Temujin, but that day, beneath the endless sky, his name was reborn. The chieftains and warriors gathered on the banks of the Onon River, where the grass shimmered like gold in the sunlight. The shamans raised their voices to the heavens, calling on the spirits of their ancestors to bless this new age. Temujin stepped forward, dressed not in silk or jewels, but in simple leather and fur. His armor was scarred from countless battles, his face lined with the marks of sleepless years. But his eyes, those gray, storm-like eyes, held a power that silenced the wind itself. When the elder raised his hand and spoke the words, the plains echoed with a new name, a name that would one day shake the earth from the Yellow Sea to the Black Sea. Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. The tribes shouted his name in unison, their voices rising like thunder. For the first time in history, the Mongols stood united, one nation under one leader. And Genghis Khan, the sleepless emperor, bowed his head to the wind as if greeting an old friend. That night, under a vast moon, the celebrations began. Fires burned across the plains, drums echoed, and horsemen danced in wide circles under the stars. But while others celebrated, Genghis Khan sat quietly by the flames, sharpening his blade. He was not thinking of victory. He was thinking of tomorrow. His mind never rested. Even in peace, he was planning for war. He believed that if he slept too long, his enemies would rise before him. He whispered to himself, "The moment you stop moving, the world forgets you." And so he moved, always. The newly crowned Khan began to reshape his people. He built an empire from dust and discipline. He created a military system that was unlike anything the world had seen, fast, flexible, and terrifyingly efficient. Every warrior was part of a family-like unit, each bound by trust and loyalty. He introduced the Yam, a messenger system that allowed information to travel faster than armies. His riders could deliver orders across thousands of miles in a matter of days. He made a law that any man, no matter his birth, could rise through the ranks if he proved his worth. And he made another law, that no ruler, not even himself, could stand above justice. In a world of kings and emperors who ruled through fear, Genghis Khan ruled through discipline and purpose. But the steppe, vast as it was, could not contain his ambition. His eyes turned south toward the Xia dynasty, a powerful kingdom that bordered his lands. It was there that the Mongols first learned what it meant to face walls, cities, and organized armies. The first siege was brutal, a clash between the old ways of the horsemen and the new power of stone and arrow. Yet the Mongols adapted. They learned to use siege engines, to capture and repurpose enemy weapons, to study their foes instead of simply charging at them. And when the Xia finally fell, Genghis Khan stood before its broken gates, the firelight painting his armor gold and red. He didn't celebrate. He didn't rest. He only said, "From the saddle, I see no end." His next target was even greater, the Jin dynasty, rulers of northern China. The Jin believed their walls made them untouchable. They mocked the nomads as barbarians who would never understand the art of empire. They were wrong. Genghis Khan led his armies across deserts and mountains, through blizzards and heat that would have destroyed lesser men. He moved like a shadow, never predictable, never defeated. Cities fell one after another. The Mongols surrounded them, cutting off food, water, and hope. Those who surrendered were spared. Those who resisted faced fire and silence. By the time the Jin realized their mistake, it was too late. Genghis Khan had turned the art of war into something larger than life, a rhythm, a pulse, a heartbeat that echoed through every soldier who rode under his banner. And yet, through it all, he slept little. His generals would find him awake at dawn, staring into the fire. Sometimes he would ride alone for hours, vanishing into the horizon as if searching for something only he could feel.
Some said he was haunted by the spirits of the men he had killed. Others said he was chasing visions of the empire he still had not built. For Genghis Khan, rest was a luxury he could not afford. The moment he closed his eyes, the world shifted, and he feared that when he woke, all he had built might vanish like smoke on the steppe wind. So he stayed awake, night after night, thinking, planning, remembering. The sleepless emperor. Years passed. His empire grew like fire in dry grass, unstoppable, consuming, eternal. The Mongols rode further west, into lands of snow and sand, past the edges of every map known to man. He conquered the Karakatai, the Khwarezmian Empire, and the great cities of Samarkand and Bukhara. For the first time, the East and the West trembled under the same name, Genghis Khan. But power is a double-edged sword. The more he ruled, the more he lost of himself. Each victory came with a shadow, each conquest with another sleepless night. One evening, deep in Central Asia, Genghis Khan sat beside his horse watching the stars. His generals slept. His soldiers snored softly in their tents. The fire crackled. The sky stretched endlessly above him. He spoke quietly to the night. I have ridden far. I have broken empires. Yet still I find no rest. And the wind whispered back, because rest is for those who are done, and you, Khan, are not done. He smiled faintly, his eyes closed for just a moment. When he opened them again, dawn was rising. The years had changed him. The boy who once slept under torn blankets on the cold steppe was now the ruler of half the known world. Yet even now, sleep was his rarest companion. For Genghis Khan, nights were never for rest, they were for remembering, for thinking of the lands he had crossed, the men he had lost, and the empire that seemed to stretch as endlessly as the sky above him. He sat by the fire, wrapped in furs, staring at the stars that had guided him since childhood. The same stars, the same wind, but a different man, older now, wiser, and haunted by his own greatness. The empire he had forged reached from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea. His armies had conquered kingdoms that had stood for centuries, the Shia, the Jin, the Khwarezmians. He had done what no other ruler had ever dared to dream. But victory never filled him with peace. It only deepened the silence inside.
To Genghis Khan, that was not merely an insult. It was the same kind of betrayal that had stolen his father's life. So he rose from his tent, mounted his horse, and began one final ride. This was not just a war. It was a storm that would sweep from Samarkand to the Persian deserts, leaving behind the echo of hoofs that would never fade. The Mongol army, disciplined, silent, relentless, crossed mountains, rivers, and sand so deep it swallowed men whole. But they moved like shadows. Their bows sang in unison, their horses drank from frozen rivers, their hearts beat to the same rhythm, the will of the Khan. City after city fell, Bukhara, Samarkand, Urgench. The Shah fled, leaving his people behind. And when Genghis Khan rode into Bukhara, he dismounted not in arrogance, but in quiet disappointment. He entered the great mosque of the city, looked around at the domes and marble, and spoke softly. "If you had not committed great sins, your God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." It was not a threat. It was a truth spoken by a man who believed himself an instrument of destiny. As the years passed, his empire expanded beyond imagining. His sons and generals carried his banners westward, toward the Volga River, toward the gates of Europe itself. Even the distant kingdoms of Russia began to tremble at whispers of his name. And yet, even at the height of his power, Genghis Khan's nights remained restless. He would rise from his tent long after midnight, walk barefoot into the cold, and watch the horizon. His generals often found him like that, staring into the darkness, eyes distant. One night, his eldest son, Jochi, approached and asked, "Father, why do you never rest?" The Khan's gaze did not move from the stars. "Because the wind does not rest," he said softly, "and I am of the wind." In his later years, the sleepless emperor turned his eyes once more to the east, to the kingdom of Western Shah, which had dared to rebel against him after years of loyalty. Though old and weary, Genghis Khan led his army himself.
The journey was brutal, scorching deserts by day, frozen plains by night. His body, now worn from decades of battle, began to fail him. But still he rode. Still he refused to stop. It was said that even as fever gripped him, he gave commands from his horse. He slept only in short bursts, head bowed forward, his mind awake even when his body wasn't. His men begged him to rest. But Genghis Khan would only whisper, "The earth does not sleep, and neither will I." The campaign was victorious, but it was also his last. In the summer of 1227, the great Khan fell, the details of his sickness forever lost in the sands of time. Some say he was injured by a fall from his horse. Others say it was the strain of endless campaigns. And some, in the whispers of the steppe, claimed he simply rode too far, that even destiny must stop to catch its breath. When he realized that his end was near, Genghis Khan did not fear it. He gathered his generals around him and spoke slowly, as if every word was carved into the wind. "If my body dies, my spirit ride forever." He ordered his burial to be secret. No tomb, no shrine, no trace. "Let the steppe take me back." And so it did. When he died, the world held its breath. The horsemen who had followed him for decades wept quietly. They buried him in silence, somewhere beneath the endless grass, the place where sky and earth become one. They say 1,000 horses trampled the ground afterward, so no one would ever know where the Khan rested. Even in death, he was the sleepless one, lost to the horizon, unseen, but never gone. His empire continued to grow after him. His sons and grandsons carried his vision to every corner of the world, from China to Europe, from Korea to Baghdad. The name Genghis Khan became more than a man. It became a wind that reshaped nations. But for those who knew his story, who remembered the boy in the cold, the man who rode through storms, and the ruler who never found rest, his legacy was more than conquest. It was a reminder that greatness often walks beside loneliness, that even the most powerful hearts can be haunted by the silence between victories, and that sometimes the men who never sleep are the ones who dream the most. Tonight, as you listen beneath your own quiet sky, imagine that wind, the same wind that carried his horse's hoofbeats across the steppe, still whispering somewhere beyond the dark. It carries the stories of men who refuse to stop moving, of dreams too vast for sleep to contain. And somewhere, perhaps, the spirit of the sleepless emperor still rides, beneath the stars, across the plains, toward the horizon that never ends. Legacy of the Wind, the empire after Genghis Khan. The wind did not stop when the great Khan's heart did. It carried onward, cold, unbroken, unending, across the plains where his spirit once rode. His empire, vast and wild, had no single center now. It was an ocean of power, and at its heart, an emptiness where one man used to stand. After Genghis Khan's death in 1227, the world waited to see what would come next. Would the Mongol storm fade without its thunder? Would the restless riders of the steppe drift back into silence? But destiny, it seems, had other plans, because even in death, Genghis Khan's dream refused to sleep. His sons gathered, wrapped in mourning robes of felt and fur, around a sacred fire. The eldest, Jochi, was gone, dead before his father. That left Chagatai, the stern, Ogede, the calm, and Toloi, the fierce and loyal youngest. From the shadows of the tent came the whisper, "Who shall carry the empire now?" It was Ogede whom Genghis had chosen, the son most like the wind itself, steady and sure. He was crowned Great Khan, ruler of all Mongols, inheritor of an empire that stretched farther than any map could hold. And so began a new chapter, not of conquest alone, but of order, of dreams made real. Ogede, unlike his father, preferred building to burning. He ordered cities to rise on the steppe, great capitals where none had stood before. The most famous was Karakorum, a city of tents and temples, palaces and smithies, built upon the bones of the old world. Travelers said that when you entered Karakorum, you could hear every language under heaven. Persian merchants bartered beside Chinese craftsmen. Russian envoys sat beside Mongol generals. It was a meeting place of worlds, born from one man's restless vision. Yet, even as the empire thrived, the shadow of Genghis Khan lingered. His name was spoken like a prayer or a curse. His image rode in banners and songs. Every general who marched, every prince who ruled, carried his ghost beside them. The Mongols spread outward once more, west into the heart of Europe, east into the coasts of Korea and Japan. Their armies were like dust storms, rolling endlessly, carrying both fear and progress. Under Ogede's rule, they captured Kiev, crossed into Hungary, and reached the edges of Vienna itself. Europe trembled. Kings prayed for deliverance, while monks whispered that the world was ending, that the horsemen of revelation had come. But the Mongols did not come for faith or apocalypse. They came because they could not stop. They were the wind, still chasing horizons. Far to the east, in the lands of China, the old dynasties were falling, and in their place, the Mongol dream grew larger than ever. When Ugaday died, the empire passed into the hands of his kin, and through years of struggle, power slowly found its way to a grandson, Kublai Khan. Kublai the thinker, the statesman, the dreamer. If Genghis was the storm, Kublai was the sky that followed. He brought scholars and artists into his court, built grand cities, and dreamed not of destruction, but of empire, true empire. It was under Kublai Khan that the Mongols would found the Yuan dynasty, the first foreign rulers of all China. He made Beijing his capital. He opened the roads of silk, invited the merchants of Venice, and welcomed travelers like Marco Polo, who would one day tell the world of a realm so vast it seemed unreal. But even under Kublai's golden reign, something was fading. The Mongol heart, the endless riding, the open sky, was being buried beneath stone walls and silk robes. The steppe warriors were turning into kings, and kings, no matter how great, cannot move like the wind. The unity that Genghis forged began to crack. Each branch of his family carved out its own kingdom, the Golden Horde in Russia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the Yuan dynasty in China. The empire was still vast, but it no longer breathed as one. Still, in the quiet hours, when night fell across the steppe, the old songs of Genghis Khan could still be heard. The herder sang of the man who conquered the world but never found sleep. The elders whispered that his soul still rode the wind, unseen, watching over the empire he left behind. They said that when the grass bends in sudden gusts, it is Genghis Khan passing by, checking that his people still remember. And indeed, they did. Centuries passed, but his name endured, not just as a conqueror, but as a force, a symbol of vision, of endurance, of destiny that rides beyond rest. His descendants ruled empires, shaped trade, spread ideas and inventions from east to west. Gunpowder, paper, printing, and silk, the gifts of the East, traveled the roads the Mongols had opened. The world became smaller because Genghis Khan had dreamed of making it one. In the end, the Mongol Empire faded as all empires do. But the wind he rode, the wind of change, of ambition, of connection, never truly stopped. It still blows across desert